Though Unhalfbricking had given Fairport their biggest commercial success, its release was mired in tragedy. In May 1969, the band's tour bus had crashed on the M1 motorway, killing both drummer Martin Lamble and Richard Thompson's girlfriend Jeannie Franklin. In the aftermath of the crash, Dave Mattox joined Fairport on drums and Dave Swarbrick became a full-time member of the band.
I knew what had happened and I went into that situation. I think Dave Swarbrick probably was much more influential on the band and bolstered them musically. I'd like to think that both Swarbrick and myself had a positive effect as outsiders coming in. We had the right kind of disposition, and Swarb was much more familiar with that whole world. I was kind of a bit deer in the headlights, but hopefully we both brought something to the table.
In summer 1969, Fairport regrouped to begin work on furthering the project, started with Sailor's Life, of updating historical folk compositions. The band retreated to a house in Farley Chamberlain, a deliberate seclusion in which to put together their groundbreaking album, Legion Leaf.
I think it was a masterstroke to go out in the country and all live together and sort themselves out and do the whole Farley Chamberlain thing. Because it gave them the opportunity to kind of work out the new direction. They'd done A Sailor's Life. They knew they were breaking new territory. They knew it worked, and they had the confidence to go and do it. And they come out of this trauma, and it gave them an incentive, it gave them a direction. And they went for it. And, you know, that album, Legion Leaf, came out of it, and it changed everything.
I think the notion of getting it together in the country probably did have quite a profound impact on Legion Leaf. You know, if you're spending that concentrated amount of time together as a band, living under the same roof, you know, that's probably where the concept comes from. You know, if you're all going home to your own little abodes every night, then the album probably tends to sound more like a collection of disparate songs, like on Unhalfbricking, where you've got all these different facets of what Fairport do. So perhaps that notion of communal living while the album was being conceived and put together and recorded helped lead them in the direction of the concept they came up with.
And none of us saw it as being desolate. Like I said before, we were all pals, and here we were living together. And the outside world didn't count for much, you know. It was just somewhere where you went out and got your bread and so on. And I mean bread. You know, fish and chip shop at the pub, that kind of thing. We were all pals living together and having fun. Rehearsals were fun, you know. Some nights I know we used to quite well. We used to go in there and busk every now and again when we'd get skins, and Fairport used to go in there and busk. We just had a good time. I think it was a great idea, and I think it worked. I think Legion Leaf perhaps wouldn't have come together any other way.
It still knocks me dead when I hear Matty Groves, which is one of the classic traditional ballads. You know, it's a huge song. This story about, it's got everything in that song, you know. It's about betrayal, it's about murder, it's about this kind of king who goes away and his wife has a fling with this Matty Groves, and then he comes back, somebody betrays him, he comes back and he kills them both, you know. This is this is heavy stuff, and there's been lots of versions over the years, but honestly that version that Fairport do on Legion Leaf, it still, for me, it still knocks them all into a cocked hat, because it's the story that you know, Sandy's voice is just soaring above. There's all this band going on, this whole kind of power incessant energy there, and the drama's building, and then there's Sandy telling the story above it all.
I have to say that it wasn't really till about 18 months or a couple of years later that it dawned on me what the band was trying to do and the effect that it had. At the time, what I was doing was responding literally to the music that was around me, that was presented to me. Some songs that sounded good and some dance tunes, and I responded in that way. I didn't really kind of get it until later, and I hope that what I did kind of contributed, but what I obviously realized was that Sandy was a great singer, and between her and Richard and Swarbrick and Ashley, and obviously Simon as well, they'd come up with this thing, and I was kind of hanging in there and trying to help make it all sound good.
It was a concept album, and that was the reason why I was asked to join, to bring into the group traditional material and traditional methods of doing it. That was precisely the reason I was asked to join.
It's a brilliant record, and the concept is a combination of taking these traditional folk ballads, turning them into rock epics in the case of Tam Lin and Matty Groves, and then supporting that by, what I think is the greatest thing about Richard Thompson's songwriting, and indeed Sandy Denny's songwriting, the ability to write these songs in a contemporary setting that have this traditional resonance. And until you look at the songwriting credit, you might think that it was written 200 years ago. And both Sandy and Richard had that, and it really came to flower on Legion Leaf, with Sandy writing Come All Ye, and Richard with Farewell, Farewell.
Ashley Hutchings was becoming fascinated where this music came from, and would often go up to Cecil Sharp House and root around to try and find a definitive version of a particular song. Back in 1969, for a rock and roll band, effectively, to go back to the tradition, to go back to source, it really was a revolutionary, a very radical step.
Well, I've never thought that was an enormous musical step. I've always thought it was kind of an obvious thing, and people talk about folk rock, and I'm afraid that's a whole area that I've kind of missed out on. My feeling is that those songs are actually the old songs, a lot of them, are rather complex rhythmically, and a lot of the actual attraction of the song is in the fact that they're inner rhythms as well as the basic pulse, and often the basic pulse is irregular because the songs were unaccompanied. So if you make them regular and put a rock beat to them, which is a regular pulse for dancing, then you iron out a lot of the subtleties. So in theory, it's not a great idea, in my opinion. But I must say that I thought Fairport did a great job. And I mean, the stuff with Swarbrick and the jigs and reels and the stuff that really has got a pulse is absolutely amazing, and it takes it into another league. Although, if I think about it, Legion Leaf was a fantastic album, and they did play with the time, and they did a lot of subtle things as well.
Despite the positivity surrounding the recording of Legion Leaf, creative fissures started to appear within the band. Denny was struggling with the hectic touring schedule and the length of time spent apart from her boyfriend, Trevor Lucas. She was also uncomfortable with the traditional route being pursued by Fairport and began to heed Joe Boyd's advice that a solo career would suit her better. In November 1969, 1 month before the release of Legion Leaf, both Sandy Denny and Ashley Hutchings left Fairport Convention.
My understanding was of that whole pre-Legion Leaf, post-Legion Leaf thing, was she was persuaded to join a band because of how she sang and because of the songs she wrote. My understanding is this: we do Liege and Leaf. It's a kind of a pivotal moment for the band, and it's a really pivotal moment for Ashley, who goes traditional music, Holy Grail, off he goes in one direction and wants to pull the band in that direction. Sandy, my understanding is that Sandy was kind of coming into her own with the songwriting thing and realized that she didn't want to do the folk singer thing anymore, and went off in the opposite direction, and the band were left in the middle.
I think she was fed up with the travelling. She was very involved also with Trevor Lucas, who was her boyfriend, later her husband. They weren't seeing much of each other. I mean, I remember one reason she said she quit Fairport was that she ended up as a spaced out brain on legs.
I remember having a bit of a break and going up to see some friends in Scotland, and coming back from Scotland and being met by Richard and Simon at the airport, and we've got some bad news. I said, yeah, what's happened? He said, Ashley's left the group. I went, oh, God. He said, and Sandy's left the group. Oh, God. So, what are we going to do? Well, there's this bass player that we've heard about, that Swarbrick keeps telling us about. Blah, blah, blah.
She didn't want to, having done that concept album, continue to do concept folk albums. She wanted to do her own songs, which were much more personal to her. She wanted to sing about herself and how she felt, and it was that was an attitude which was prevalent, I think. You know, the wonderful American singer-songwriters of the time, who were singing about their own state of play, and I think she wanted to be a part of that, and she was a part of that. And she was a wonderfully personal songwriter. Painted lovely pictures.
Despite admonishments from Joe Boyd, Denny elected not to launch a solo career upon her departure from Fairport, choosing instead to join her boyfriend Trevor Lucas in forming a new band, Fotheringay.
I surmise that Joe told her that he could arrange for that to happen in a bigger way, and for her to have her own group, in fact, which was what Fotheringay was. That was instigated by Joe. And I've no complaints. I mean, it was a good idea, and it got her to do more of her own stuff, which is what she wanted.
When she left Fairport, the obvious move would have been to go as a solo singer. Now, and I know that's what Joe Boyd, the Fairport producer, and wanted her to do. I think Sandy didn't feel confident. I mean, throughout her career, there was this lack of confidence. She didn't have a great deal of confidence in herself as a singer, as a writer. So I think it was the idea of jumping ship into a solo career, leaving the sort of lads club of Fairport behind. She was very wary of that. The fact she wanted to spend more time with Trevor Lucas, who went on to become her husband, he was, very accomplished singer, songwriter, great knowledge of Australian music, folk music, had been in a quite successful band called Eclection. So I mean, it made sense that the two of them should form a group.
I was first aware of Sandy's work when I was in a band called Eclection, and I had seen Fairport play on a few times around the circuit, and I think I met her once, and the connection for me was that Trevor Lucas and Sandy became partners and eventually husband and wife. But that's where it first started. So Trevor became friendly with Sandy, and consequently we got to know her then. And when Trevor and Sandy got a flat together in Chipstead Street in Fulham, and it was just one of those places everybody used to hang out. We'd just go there and talk, play music, drink wine, just like you do. And it was a great place to be. And through that, over a period of time, one night we discussed the possibility of forming a group together, and that became Fotheringay. The way the songs came to the band were initially Sandy had a collection of new songs that she wanted to try, and then I think when we started thinking in terms of the album, one thing led to another. Trevor had a fine voice, and was sort of encouraged to use it, and so everything was very social in those days. It was not really a business-like thing. So everybody was sort of very generous to each other, and it's like, yes, okay, you can sing that song, and you know, what can you? Yeah, you do this, you do that. Wasn't really any sort of forethought about what might work or not, and I think just over a period of time, rehearsals, sort of, it just all fell into place that way. Say hello to Valerie, say hello to Marianne, send them all my salary on the waters of oblivion.
I love the band. There was a looseness in their playing that Fairport's didn't have. And again, if you talk to Richard Thompson, his one criticism of Liege and Leith is that although on things like Tamlin and Matty Groves, it sounds like there are these sort of great instrumental jams going on, according to Richard, it is very, very tightly arranged, and he felt it was too tightly arranged, and it could have been looser, and there could have been more space. I think Fotheringay had that. I think the album is another significant advance in the flowering of Sandy Denny as a songwriter. I think there's some of her finest songs on there, such as The Sea and Nothing More. There's one traditional song on there, which is a tremendous version of Banks of the Nile. And, you know, actually, I thought Trevor Lucas, her husband, who is much derided, really. You know, I mean, Joe Boyd describes him as a mediocre musician. Well, you know, he brought something to the party as well, and he was Australian, and he came up with the Ballad of Ned Kelly, and, you know, I think that's one of the highlights of the record. And, you know, Sandy clearly enjoyed working with Trevor, although there were other problems within the band. But yeah, I mean, you know, I would make out a strong case for Fotheringay as not just a diversion in her career, but actually rather important, and a period that bequeaths us one very, very fine record that has never really had its due.
There was a Gyp came over the land, he sang so sweet and gaily. He sang beneath the wildwood tree and charmed the great lord's lady.
I was never that enamoured with Fotheringay. I think Fotheringay was born out of her own insecurity. She should have made the blockbuster solo album. But she was just so riddled with insecurities herself. She didn't feel she could carry it off. She needed a band around her. She didn't want her own name out there. You know, she didn't have that kind of confidence in herself. And I think Fotheringay was a compromise. You know, it didn't really, for me, have that direction, that sense of purpose. I don't think she knew exactly what she wanted to do with it.
It's if you don't return with me, I swear you'll see me never.
Fotheringay never made it on record for my money, but they were an interesting band. Steele, I did a lot of gigs. We did a lot of two-handers, and they did some really interesting stuff. but there were those around her who didn't like it, who thought she should be a soloist. I don't know what you do about that. I don't know what you do about that. I think that the musician should be allowed to express his or herself the way they see fit. And sometimes I think managers get in the bloody way. They were developing into something quite interesting. In fact, I think something very interesting when a halt was called. Probably very interesting things would have happened if they'd have carried on, but they didn't. And that first album doesn't tell you how good they were, I don't think.